All right, Chapter 20, how to use email, custom error pages, and back button controls. So what are our objectives in this chapter? We want to, it's kind of a mishmash of things here. We're going to look at the how we can send email messages from our web app with multiple recipients, attachment, HTML formatting, embedded images. We'll look at how to handle errors and display custom error pages for our ASP.NET exceptions or any HTTP errors that might occur. Finally, we're going to look at problems with the back button. You know, if people are hitting back and they think that they've got items in their, for example, they have items in their cart that really aren't there. We'll talk about some strategies to deal with that. So we'll look at things, the different classes out of the .NET framework, the mail message, the mail address, the SMTP client, the attachment, alternate view objects, how they all come together to help us send email messages from our web app. We'll look at tools for helping us test email. So there's a third-party tool that the book mentions, SMTP for Dev. So we'll give you an idea what that looks like, where you can pull that down from to help you test sending email. We don't always all have Exchange servers at our beck and call. We'll talk about ways to catch exceptions and how ASP.NET can deal with them. We'll talk about how to use web.config for handling specific types of HTTP errors. And then we'll get to the back button problem and talk about a couple ideas how to address that. So first on the chopping block is email. What is email? How does it work? So SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, is the client for sending mail. We would have our web service our web app could use the SMTP client to send email to an SMTP server. Then the server then forwards it using SMTP across the internet to a POP server. The POP server is for receiving email, and then a client goes up to a POP server and says, "Hey, you have an email for me?" and sends it down. So this might be Outlook over here connecting to the POP server to pull down email. And this could be Outlook sending the email via SMTP across the internet. There's lots of other email servers out there. Three email protocols that we're talking about. I already mentioned Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, POP. MIME is the format of the email. And the book actually defines all those guys, but basically they're pretty ubiquitous. Three common reasons for to me, this seems, again, obvious. Confirm receipt of an order, or remind registered user of forgotten password, which the recovery password control does for us automatically if we have SMTP set up. Notify support personnel of a problem. So all sorts of good reasons why a web app might want to send email. If you need to do some testing of sending email, you don't have to install your own Exchange server. You can use, there's lots of tools out there, and this is one of them, SMTP for Dev. It doesn't really send email, it kind of mimics it, but good for testing. So you can go in there, you can see the email that would have been sent, and that's what it looks like. So how do we get it? It's out there on Codeplex. If you're not familiar with Codeplex, you should be. Codeplex is sort of Microsoft's open source area, so lots of good code up on Codeplex, and this is one of the better tools up there, SMTP for Dev. So go out there to Codeplex and download it, install it, and run it is really what it boils down to. So how do we actually, from our, what classes, what methods do we call to actually send email from our web app? So we use the mail message class, and it has three different constructors. It can be an empty constructor. You can specify who it's from and who it's going to. You can specify who it's from, who it's going to, the subject and the body. So see some examples of that. So there's additional properties. There's a BCC. There's whether or not the body's HTML and should be treated as such, whether it has any attachments, whether there's any alternate views. If you format an email as HTML, but then some clients can't handle that, you might define an alternate view so that they still have a plain text view. Otherwise, you'll just strip the text out of your HTML, and it's not very good looking. So mail address class is where we can set a mail address, and it either takes an email address or optionally you could specify display name. So here's an example where we're saying, hey, we've got this send text message, and we're using the mail address to create an email address from the string that they sent us, the from address, with a display name. Then we create a from address, mail address object type, a to add mail address object type, and a CC add mail address. So these, typically you would think of these as strings, but these are objects because they have a little more going on than just the email address itself. There's might be a display name or some other information. So we set these three up. We instantiate these mail address objects. Then we can create a mail message object using those mail address objects we just created. Set the subject, the body, and then we'll add that CC. There's a CC object of our mail message object that we can add to, and that's putting together and piecing together a whole message to be sent. We could do this all in the constructor, so the mail message we can specify from, to, subject, and body all at once, and then add the CC. So, different ways. That's way one, that's way two. Doesn't really matter. We mentioned in the last video, I'll mention it again, if you're using Visual Studio 2012, you can use the ASP.NET website tool to edit your web.config and set up the SMTP settings. You could just edit the config yourself if you want, the web.config yourself, or if you're using Visual Studio 2013, you can either edit the web.config yourself, or I'll send you a link with ways to get this tool back into 2013. These are some of the constructors of the SMTP client class. You can specify just create me an SMTP client, or give it a name, and a port. Default port's 25. What are some of the methods of the SMTP client class? You can say, hey, go send, and then give it a message. So earlier we looked at how to create a message. This is how we would actually then send it across the wire. Optionally, we could say, I want to send from, to, subject, body. So I can either send a message or just break it down and send it that way as well. So some examples. Here we are creating a new client, and then we send an already created message to, using the client. Here's an example where we're saying, hey, I want us to create a new client, and then we're going to name the server, and then we're going to send to that named server. If I want to do attachments, there's an attachment object I can use that takes a file name as a parameter. So here we're saying we're creating a new message. We give it all the parameters that a new mail message object expects. We map a path name to a file. So we use the map path property of the server object to get the fully qualified. That way, what returns from here is a fully qualified, what am I saying? Fully qualified file name to this file. Then we take that string and use that to create a new attachment, and then add that to the attachments collection of the message object. Different way of doing it, again, create a new mail message, again, use the map path to get the fully qualified name, but then we're just going to instantiate the attachment right inside the parameter of the add method of the attachments collection of the message object. So that's kind of, this is, I actually prefer it more verbose. I think it's cleaner. Not necessarily, well, I don't know if it's cleaner, but I think it's more readable if it's more verbose. This is just saving you a line of code and it's being more succinct. And these are some examples of what you might expect to see if you sent these emails using both text and HTML. Obviously, HTML looks a little nicer. So if you want to do HTML, you can create your mail message, and then you create an alternate HTML view. So if your client can handle HTML, it's available. So you use the alternate view object to say, hey, I'm going to create an alternate view, which is going to be an HTML type. Add it to the alternate views collection of the message object, and then send it. And here's an example where we would actually say, if the person is requesting HTML, then let's actually put literally HTML tags in the body of the message. Otherwise, we'll just use text. And examples of what that would look like with an embedded image. How do we do an embedded image? We use the linked resource object. So we can go down here, we say, hey, let's create a new linked resource object. We'll pass it an image path. Where did that come from? Again, we use that math path method of the server object to fully qualify the name. Then we can pass it to the linked resource class to create a new linked resource image object. And then we set that, the content, well, we have to define the content of that image. What is it? Give it an ID, I should say. Then we finally add that to the linked resources collection of the view and send it off. And down here is an example of saying, hey, if it's HTML, we could specify, show that image embedded using the image tag right there. and that way when people read it, oops, back up here where people read it, it would actually show up in the email message. All right. What about custom errors? So it's nice to have custom error pages in your web application. It's not nice to use the default error handler. They actually consider that a security risk. If you just use the default error handler, it usually gives you, it's meant for developers. It gives you all the information about where the error occurred, what line of code. Sometimes it spills out information about the data stores that you're using. So we prefer to use custom error messages. Things like this is what we would expect an end user to see, not a whole host of information about all of our source code and the data sources that we use. So what are some different ways we can use or display a custom error message when an exception occurs? You, of course, can use try-catch statements. Try-catch statements, basically you define a block of things that you're going to try that might cause an exception, and then you have a catch statement that says, if an exception occurs, do these things. There's also a finally clause, so it's try-catch finally. Finally, it defines a block that says, no matter if an exception occurred or not, always do these things at the end. And usually that's for cleanup code. If you have any unmanaged code or any connections or any data connections that you want to close, you would do that in a finally. The page error method in the code behind can also be used to catch unhandled exceptions. This happens at the page level. So if you do it using the page error method, it automatically will catch those, and then you can redirect to your custom error page. Similarly, there's an application error method in the global.asx file, and it will also catch unhandled exceptions, this time at the application level. And again, you can do, just redirect to a custom error page if something happens at that level. Finally, there's a custom errors element of the web.config, and you can say, hey, if there's any errors that, not a page error, not an application error, but maybe an HTTP error, you see there's 404s and things like that, then that's where we say, in this case, go show this page. So don't show the regular default 404, but give them a nice, cool 404. And I don't know if you guys have been out there to the web sometimes, but it's kind of cool. Some of these Twitter and Facebook and some of these guys have come up with some really cool 404 pages. They put up some custom, instead of just seeing regular 404, you actually see like an elephant or some weird picture. They're kind of funny. Some common properties of the exception class, what the exception message is, where it came from, the source, and sometimes exceptions are made up of other exceptions. So there might be an inner exception, and what I generally do is check and say if inner exception is null, then there's no more. But if it's not null, then maybe there's some more information I want to present to the end user. It may not just be that we're the resource is unavailable, but maybe we're out of disk space, or we're out of that item, or whatever. If we can give them more information, it's usually helpful. Some methods of the HTTP server utility class. So if I'm getting exceptions, there's a get last error method that I can call to figure out what the last error is. Once I've dealt with that, I can call the clear error method to say, okay, now go ahead and get rid of that. I've dealt with that error. So here's an example of using try-catch statements. Try, and this might be, go to some page or go, check inventory for something or whatever. If something goes wrong, then we come here in the excepts block, and that's where we would throw up, check the exception object, look at the message, check the inner exception, and maybe display some information back to the user, or redirect to a page that would display information back to the user and pass them that exception information. So here's an example where we're saying, hey, let's call that get last error off the server object and store it in a variable called ex. If there's an inner exception, we can check for that. Once we're done dealing with those, we would clear that error. We can write out the information. Here's a custom error handling class. So we're saying, hey, this is my class error handler. I'm going to get the last error. Check if there's any inside. If it's null, then they're none. So we'll just go with the current one. Otherwise, we'll go deep into the inner exception and use that one. This is the rest of that custom error handling class where we're setting up to send an email. So now not only are we checking for errors, but we're using that email handling that we talked about earlier to then notify support. Hey, something's gone wrong. You better go check your website. Similar method in the application error. So that's that method that handles errors at the application level. And again, we're creating that error handler class and sending an email if something went wrong. And here we are in the web.config where we're saying, hey, if there's an HTTP error, so if someone requested a page that's not around, instead of generating the default 404, let's send them to this cool page, and we'll put like a funny picture and say, oh, sorry that you tried to get to a page that we don't have, or if a 500, that's a server error, right? So if our server's too busy, sometimes we generate a 500. Again, we could redirect them instead of just sending them a 500 code. We could direct them to a customized page that gives it's a little nicer, more professional, polished look than just throwing a 500 back at them. Some other codes, I mentioned 500 server error, page not found, access denied, another access denied, and there's more, but these are some of the common ones. The back button problem. So, switching gears on you, let's talk about the problem of the back button. What can happen is you can have a user, entering items into their cart, and then suppose they remove an item, and then I didn't mean to remove it. They use the back button to put it back in there. That's not really, using the back button doesn't really put it back in there. And so if they were to go to check out, they would, not have everything in the cart that they thought they had, which wouldn't be good, right? We want them to buy everything they want. So, how do we prevent them from making that mistake? Let me actually jump out to Visual Studio and show you what we're talking about. So here I am in Chapter 18, and I've got some commented out code. These are some of the I'm going to uncomment out that code in a minute, but let me just run Chapter 18 as is. And this is our, Halloween Superstore. And I'm going to go order a couple items. I'll take Austin Powers, and I'll take a Darth Vader mask. I like that hat. I'll take two of those, one for me, one for my wife. And I'll get a fog machine, or some fog juice. Well, if I get some fog juice, I need a fog machine. Wait a minute. Let's get that too then, right? Can't get the juice without getting the machine. So now that I've got some items in my cart, what if I decide, I really don't want that Darth Vader mask? What was I thinking? Let's get rid of that. And then my wife comes by and says, wait, yeah, we want Darth Vader mask. Oh, I'm sorry. So I'll use the back button, and look, it's back. It's in my cart. Not really, right? If I were to debug this and look at my cart object, I've still only got 3 objects in there. The back button doesn't submit anything to my web app. It just goes back to the client and pulls this from cache. In fact, if I continue shopping and then try to add, a saw head, watch what my cart says. Those Darth Vader masks, they're not in there. They never were in there. Using that back button didn't do anything, even though it looked like it did something. So if I had hit checkout and finished my order, I'd have been surprised that I thought they were in there, but they're not. So we want, from an application standpoint, to prevent the user from doing that and making that mistake. So what are some options for doing that, preventing that? Well, one option is to disable browser caching for user input forms, but the book says that's not really reliable. You can try to turn that off, but there's problems with that. Another option is using this post redirect get pattern, or PRG pattern, and the idea is it prevents the page from being saved in the browser's cache, and that's a little more reliable, and I'll show you that in a second. And then the third option is timestamps or random numbers, and basically it doesn't matter one or the other, but we'll use that to track the pages so we can detect if a page isn't current. So let me show you the PRG pattern and the random number methods. We'll start with PRG. So PRG would be implemented in our cart page, where we would say, hey, if they're going to pull something out of the cart, then instead of just displaying the cart and having it cached, let's not display the cart, but instead redirect to the cart page, which would prevent the removed, it would basically prevent them from caching the page in an incorrect state. So let me go ahead and run this. So now we'll try to reproduce the problem, right? I'll add a couple items. I'll add the Austin Powers. I'll add the Darth Vader mask. And I'll add something else. Then I'll go remove the Darth Vader mask. Now I changed my mind. I want the Darth Vader mask back, so I'm just going to cheat, try to hit the back button. But notice it doesn't go back to the cart because we never cached that when we removed it, instead of staying there and caching that removed state, we redirected and kept it out of the cache. So the user goes back and goes, oh, okay, well, I guess I got to go add, Darth Vader back. Or, let me go see what my cart, maybe they're confused, and they say, let's just go to the cart. And they go, oh, all right, well, let me, So the back button we prevented them from going back to that invalid page using the PRG pattern. So that's one option. The other option, let's put that back, is to say, you know what? I guess the problem with the PRG is that it actually causes an extra round trip. We didn't see it. It's not a very big application, but it did cause 2 round trips there. So it's a little bit of a performance hit. So another option is to say, hey, let's keep track of our page state using something like a random number or a timestamp. So what we'll do is every time the page loads, we'll check to see if it's expired. If it is, then we'll redirect them and let them know, they tried to use the back button to get, and now the page is expired. If it's not, then we'll just update our timestamp so we know it is indeed a current page. So I'll put a breakpoint there so we can see this in action. Let me stop debugging and start. So now, this is the other method to prevent the back button issue. When I go and I add a quantity to my cart, it checks to see if it's expired. Let me add something else. My 2 Darth Vader masks. And let me step through. So is it expired? So we step through here and it says, hey, do we already have a timestamp? We do. Do we already have? And it saves the timestamp in 2 spots. One in session state for the client and one in view state for the server. Or actually, I think that was reversed. View states for the client and session states for the server. So now that we've already saved those, because I went through this the first time and it actually, I'll show you the method the save timestamps method that we already ran through. But because those are there and they equal the same thing, right? I came up to this line here. Let's see. And I said, oh, that's what I get for trying to move my line. Let me go back. Let's look at my cart. So we're checking if it's expired, and we're saying, is that null? Is that null? Oh, okay, so we haven't set view state yet, so we haven't expired yet. So now let's add one more item. Again, not yet expired. Save our timestamps on the session and the view state and the session. So the only time it's going to be expired is when we do something like this. We say, hey, let's remove something. So it's still not expired. But now we try to get put it back by hitting the back button. So now, if I were to try to check out, I'm trying to check out with an expired page. So I'll hit checkout, watch what happens. We come in here, we check to see if it's expired. We come in here and we say, hey, that's not null, that's not null. So we know they've been here before. But let's check the server and the session, the view state from the client and the session from the server. If they're equal, we're okay. But if they're not equal, that means we're out of sync, so we've been expired. And indeed, now that we're expired, it redirects to the expired page and says, you tried to submit an expired part. Please don't use the back button. So that's another way of trying to implement. And I didn't step through the last bit of code here, but this is where it would have the redirect here to that expired page. So another way of trying to deal with this back button issue in your ASP.NET web application. And the book just walks you through some of the different code. Same thing I just kind of showed you. All right. So there is no book application for Chapter 20. There is no exercise for Chapter 20. But you can do what I did is look at Chapter 18 and add the code. I'll put these slides up on the class. It's in your book as well. But you can use the code from Chapter 20 and apply it to the example application in Chapter 18 to try out some of these techniques. All right, guys, if you have any questions, shoot me a question either in the Q&A panel in the live meeting feel free to send me an email. Thanks.